is like the next lecture. If not, I will be here, and you're going just to change that, okay? But I'll let you know in advance. So just like to see from where we are coming, we were talking about the ultimate strength and the yield strength, right? So it's the part that either like the material will fracture or the material will suffer like the elastic deformation, but will go back to the initial dimension, okay? That you were mentioning about, especially like restorative materials. Let me see if I can click the light a little bit. So here it's basically the same idea. And I remember that I start to talk about that because they also trying to be always a little bit over the proportional limit. That's the link between the elastic deformation and the plastic deformation, right? So the terms elongation and compression will depend on the type of force that I'm applying, okay? So if I'm applying a compressive force, I'm going to have compression of the material, and if I'm applying a tensile force, I'm going to elongate the material, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. Let's see. Okay, better, right? Okay. And if you want to calculate that, you basically just need to see how much strain you have. The strain is basically how much deformation you do, how much deformation you have, and you can calculate the percentage, okay? It's a percentage because this is not like a proper measure of space. It's just a measure of deformation, okay? So you don't know if that's in meters, in millimeters, or centimeters, okay? Make sense? Perfect. So it's the same idea. If a material can go through a lot of elongation, it's a ductile material. If it can go through a lot of compression, it's malleable.
Right.
Yeah.
Malleable. It's close enough. Malleable. Perfect.
How does resilience fit into this? Like its ability to be stretched out and then or compressed and then.
Okay. So the resilience will go up to the proportional limits. So for example, if you think about an elastic, it's a very resilient material because it can absorb force but can go back to the initial dimension. So if you remember from that part in here, so the resilience is everything that's under this triangle in here that goes up to the proportional limit.
So it's something ductile that pulls out long and stays. Or pulls
Yeah,
out.
it can withstand more force. So the ductile, we are talking about basically the entire graph, okay? About the entire amount of force that you are receiving, okay? Until before it breaks. So it's a little, it can go through elastic and plastic deformation together. To the point that when you talk about resilience, it just go to the proportional limit, so only elastic deformation. Okay? So this is basically what we were talking about before. So here is basically so the plastic strength, okay? Not only elastic. Okay? So that's the only difference. So, and if you can withstand a lot of force, will be ductile or malleable material. If you can't, it will be like a very brittle material, like a glass, okay? Because it cannot withstand like the plastic force. So as soon as it gets there, it starts to bleed. Basically, that's the idea. That sounded like a good idea in the beginning when I tried to do those videos. Those videos came from Brazil, so it was a very kind of warm day. So I was trying to leave all the time like kind of almost frozen, like the gelatin. And of course, it was losing temperature really quick. So, the idea is just to show that as soon as I remove my finger from there, or the force, the material, the gelatin goes back to the initial position. So that's the resilience, okay? So the energy required to go up to the proportional limit, okay? So if I keep myself below that, I'm just going to have elastic deformation. If I go over that, I'm going to have plastic deformation. And the angulation, the inclination of this line gives me my elastic modulus, okay? That means what? If I need a lot of stress to cause a little bit of strain, I have a really high elastic modulus, right? Meaning that my material is really rigid, okay? So a low elastic modulus is a more elastic material, okay? So it's inversely proportional. Make sense? So a high elastic modulus means that I have a big angle in here, so I have a lot more stress than strain in the proportion, and that means that my material is rigid. So for example, ceramic will have an elastic modulus of about 50 to 60 gigapascal sometimes, and our denting range is about 15, so it's a lot more elastic. Okay. It's just interpretation of the same things over and over. Here is basically the same idea, so doing flexural strength test on the gelatin. So you can see that at some point, the lower part in here that I'm creating like a tensile force will start to rip. Okay? And that was the bad part because everything started to melt. It was really hot. But it worked though. So all the energy that you can give there, you define the toughness of the material. Okay? Or the final resistance. So it's the amount of energy that the material can have before it fractures. Okay? So that's very kind of linear, okay? There are variations of that are basically when you're going to have, let's say, fatigue, okay? That you give like several kind of forces applied over the material over time. So that makes the toughness of the material usually to reduce a little bit because the material will fracture in a smaller, with a smaller stress than it would usually. Make sense? So for example, let's suppose that I have ceramic and I'm just trying to fracture that, to fracture the ceramic in a single movement, okay? Probably the fracture resistance of my material will be a lot higher than if I give like 1,000 masticatory cycles over it, okay? So that means that in our mouth, probably, the material tends to have like a toughness that's a little bit smaller than when we do like an in vitro testing, okay? Just because you have several more things that comes into play. Okay? So here's the idea comparing like the ortho resin that you have. You manipulated, right? The ortho resin before. The one that you have the monomer with kind of a really like funky smell and like a powder that you mix together and you use that, right? Oh yeah, I thought that you did. Okay. Anyhow, you're going to go through that. So the nice thing about acrylic, and it's a really good material to use for provisionals, for example, BP Fix, although we don't do that, it's a nice material that you can use. And what's the benefit of that? It's really an elastic material, meaning that when I cement that in the mouth of my patient, usually it's easy to remove if I need without breaking the material. It's a little bit different from what happens with the integrity sometimes, that a lot of you try to remove from the typodon, and what happened? The thing broke in half, right? Because it's not elastic, it's a brittle material. So, but what's the advantage of the disacryl? Why we use those in here? Because they're faster for you to make your provisional, and it looks nicer. Okay, it's easier to make it look nicer. Okay, so those are one of the benefits. And the composites that we have that would be similar to the integrity that you do as well is a more brittle material. So for example, you can see that's a very hard material, so if you do like the provision over there, usually will not deform to the point that you can really remove easily from the tooth of your patient. That's why you need to use a lot of Vaseline, for example. Okay? So basically that's the idea. But so those are kind of similar materials. They have basically the same, almost the same resilience because the area that you have under both triangles are similar, okay? But the toughness is completely different. The acrylic is a lot tougher than the composite, okay? So it's the same idea with a glass, okay? A glass basically will have almost the same curve, it will be almost as resilient as this one, but as soon as it starts to receive like plastic deformation, that will break, okay? Make sense? Same thing, the dentin and the enamel, so the enamel behaves like a glass, the dentin behaves like a cushion, okay? So our ceramic, for example, and our materials that we usually have will behave like the enamel, okay? The only materials that will behave a little bit similar to the dentin will be which ones? The glass ionomer cement, that you're going to have a lecture about that, and some composites, especially like low viscosity composites, or bulk fill composites that Dr. Asaf is going to talk about them, okay? That we can use what we call like a dentin-like restoration, okay? So enamel is rigid and brittle, so you fracture as soon as you go over the proportional limit. and the dentin is more flexible and tough. And significance for that is basically when you have the ortho wires, right? It's really important for that material to have a high proportional limit because it needs to be very elastic. Why? Because if it can do like a plastic deformation and that wire will just keep like the shape that you place it, you'll never move the tooth. Make sense? So what's like an ortho movement when you use like the brackets? It's basically a wire that you're bending and you're generating stress under that wire. So you fix that with those rubber, right? With the small rubbers over the brackets. But that wire is all the time trying to go back to the initial position. That's why it changes the position of your tooth. Okay? The Invisalign is almost the same idea. So you have kind of a flexible tray that you place inside the mouth of the patient, but all the time is making pressure to go back to the initial shape. Okay? So that's why also it moves your tooth. For the denture tooth, it's the same idea. In the past, there are a lot of teeth that were done in porcelain. What was the problem? Sometimes they shake. Okay? So the acrylic, being a lot more resilient, being a more less brittle material, it tends to last longer. Okay? But doesn't look as nice. So all the time you have like pros and cons for everything. And just to finish, we have another property that's called hardness. The hardness is basically the capacity that a material has to make risks over the other material. So the hardest material that you have is the diamond, right? That's why you have diamond burrs. Because technically you could cut whatever you want. Okay? You're going to see when you're trying to cut metal is not so straightforward as that, but it works well. Okay? So there are some tests that you can do. That's basically the Nook and the Vickers hardness. That the names are really not important. Basically, you do an indentation on the surface of the material, and you can measure like the size of the polygon that you created. But that's basically curiosity. Okay. What's important to know? The hardness is related with the capacity of the material to resist abrasive forces. So if you get a material that's not hard enough, what happens? By the time for a patient that is a bruxist, or if you have like a big restoration on the occlusal of a first or second molar, you're going to lose the anatomy really quickly, and eventually the contact points as well. So you want a material that has like a high hardness, okay? And even when you're brushing your teeth, you're going to see in the clinics that we have a lot of patients that have like tooth recession, and they start to have like kind of oval-shaped cavity next to the soft tissue. Because of the abrasive force, sometimes you remove a lot of tooth structure as well. Okay, so when you're placing like a restoration on that place, on that spot, on that kind of class 5, although it is not like a callous lesion, you need a material that can resist to the edges of the patient, so to the brushes. Okay, makes sense? So there are some of them. So the hardness of the enamel is really, really high. The dentin is really like small. That's why we ask you to remove like the dentin, the decay on the dentin in very slow speed, okay? Because a lot easier to cut the dentin, that's easier to cut the enamel. And when you get to the porcelain, usually it's harder than both, okay? So I think there's somebody from the last year that they were trying to do a class 1 on a crown, on porcelain crown, because they didn't realize that was like a restoration. And like the person was really struggling with that because it's really hard to cut. I don't remember if it was like this year or if it was last year. But anyhow, it was a funny situation because, oh, I can't prepare the class 1. I said, okay, let me take a look. I thought, okay, it's a little bit hard. I looked at the burr was kind of fine. I said, okay, something's wrong. Okay, let me see the tooth. So I saw the tooth and there was a crown there. So was a fun experience. In here you can see that those values in here of the elastic the flexural modulus, it changes a little bit from the values that I told you, and basically it changed because it was made through another testing machine. So for example, the Nook hardness is completely different from the flexural strength that we were discussing like so far, okay? With the graphs about strain and stress. So that's why you have lower values. but it continues to have the same tendency. So enamel is really kind of high elastic modulus. Where's the porcelain? The porcelain is even higher, okay, meaning that the form is even less. And the dentin is more elastic, working as a cushion, okay? So the values itself, they are not exactly important. The important thing is to have at least an idea about the tendency, okay? Go ahead.
Since porcelain is so much harder than enamel, what keeps the porcelain crown from cracking the opposing tooth over time?
That's a really good question. Basically, the dentin works as a cushion, that's the first thing. And the second thing, you should never have occlusal excess, right? We adjust the occlusion in a way that you distribute the force through all the tooth. If you take like a zirconia crown and you leave like 1 millimeter high, for sure the patient will have a really bad time, okay? Not necessarily the tooth will break, because again, the dentin will work as a cushion, and the periodontal ligament also works as a cushion. Remember from that video that shows like all the stress dissipating, including through the bone. But what happens? The patient starts to have perissementitis. That's similar to a patient with irreversible pulpitis. Okay, so the patient can't sleep at night because every time that he touches that tooth, it hurts a lot. Okay, so that's why. I think this is the last, or before the last slide. This is just like the curve about the strain and time of an impression material, for example. So what happens? We manipulate the material, the PVS or the alginate, right? And we insert it in the mouth of the patient, right? You had that experience, right? It was a lot of fun, huh? I remember last year somebody got like all the way down their throat. It was a really nice impression. I could not find the picture anymore, but I will find sometime. So what happens? You didn't have any strength, okay? By the time that you insert in the mouth of your patient, you're starting to create strength, right? Because you create stress, especially when the material is harder than it should, okay? So it starts to create strength up to the point that you remove from the mouth of the patient. When you remove what you have like an elastic recover of the material that will vary according with the impression material that you have. So for example, the PVS tends to go almost all the way back to the initial position, okay? Meaning that you almost don't have any deformation. So that elastic recovery goes exactly there, but in the end of the day, you still is going to have a little bit of deformation with any material that you have, okay? That's why this curve starts to be flat, okay, over time. And that also explains, you're going to see with me, I think next semester, on the dental materials too, when we talk about a material that's called polyether, that you need to wait at least 1 or 2 hours before you pour the cast. Exactly because of that, because it takes a little bit more to the polyether to dissipate those force, those strength. So you should pour your cast only after that. Okay? I think that's it. Okay. Do you have any questions about this lecture? A lot. Okay, perfect. Who wants to be the first?
Whose dog is that?
Oh, I don't know. I just found it. That's a really good one. I used to have some dogs. I never had a, how do you call that here? It's a Saint Bernard. Yeah. Never had one of those, but I used to have a Great Dane back in Brazil when I was like a kid. So it's like the Scooby-Doo from the movies, if you will. It's a really nice dog because it was almost like a mini horse for me. And I was like 4 or 5 years old, so I was really light. And I had like a skateboard by the time, so you just throw food to the dog and he would like push you really fast, almost like a wakeboard. So it was fun. Okay, somebody else had a question.
Can you clarify the difference between proportional limit and yield strength and non-yield?
Yes, I can go back to the graph really quick. Here kind of have this. Okay. So the proportional limit, that is in Portuguese, so it's reversed, but this is the proportional limit. The proportional limit defines exactly the transition between an elastic deformation and a plastic deformation. Okay. The yield strength is a random number that we take as a reference that is slightly above the proportional limit. Okay. So that is very kind of philosophical discussion, but the idea is that we need to calculate the yield strength. And as high as it is, that means that any force that you apply below that yield strength should just generate an elastic deformation. Okay, so the proportional limit is the limit that you have among both. But the problem is that how do you know that this is exactly the point where you have elastic deformation if you don't go a little bit over? So that's the yield strength. So it's kind of a little bit over, so you're sure that from that point on, you're having only plastic deformation. Makes sense? So the yield strength is light above because of that. So you're sure that up to the point immediately, like before that, you just had elastic deformation.
So when you try to look at like what material, you said you wanted a higher yield strength than
Yes.
higher ultimate strength.
Yes.
Why don't you refer to the proportional limit
Okay.
in that comparison?
You could, just like technically, there is no manufacturer that reports like the proportional limit. They always say yield strength. That's why. But that's why I mentioned also that's a philosophical discussion because both numbers are kind of related, but it's just the way that usually the manufacturer reports. Okay. No problem. Any other questions? No? Okay. That covers this one, so now you can try to catch up in the other lectures as well. So now we try really quickly to kind of close the gap, because a lot of people ask me, okay, we have the BP of 1, for example, but how does it interrelate with everything else that I did so far, right? And that's a really interesting question. Remember that you did your WhatsApps on the dental anatomy course? You're still doing that, right? And how do you like it? It's fun? Yeah.
It's hard sometimes to see how it applies, especially now that we're drilling,
Okay.
but yeah, we're still doing it.
Okay. Okay, that works. Yeah, it can be, I would say, frustrating sometimes, right? To play with the wax. No, it was just for me. For me, it was at some point. Now I have just fun with that, but it goes over time. Okay, so I'll try to show in this lecture, if the time allows me, how those dental anatomy courses are related to whatever you do on fixed pros. Okay? Okay. Can we try to do that? So every time that you have a patient that you're doing like crown or something like that, or indirect procedure, that you need to transfer the position of your tooth and the position of the restorations that you want to your lab technician, you need to do an impression, right? Everybody be there, right? Somebody like alginate impression, PVS impressions, or whatever, to transfer all the information to outside the mount, and to mount an articulator, for example, in some cases, as you did as well. We're not talking about the impression materials now, but now we're going to talk about the dental stones. So there are the materials that you're using to pour the cast. Okay? So as you might realize so far, you have several different types of stones that you can use, right? So to start that, the stones can be used in several different markets, right? Not only dentistry, but when you broke an arm, for example, you kind of mummify it. Thanks to God, I have been there only once. I was playing table tennis and I was on the beach. It was summertime, like almost spring break. I was playing like really nicely, and I kind of broke my middle finger playing table tennis. So. And what happens that was not almost any resource on the city that I was, and the guy looked at the X-ray and said, "Okay, I think you didn't break, but just in case, we're going to immobilize your entire arm. So it looks like I fall off a skateboard or something. But in fact, nothing happens. But I lost my, so that's how I learned to play with my left hand, table tennis. Because it was the only thing that I could do. Is that or video games, but obviously to play PlayStation with like your entire hand with a giant glove is hard. But you can play Need for Speed at least, so that's my back. Anyhow. I don't know why I got into those details. So they have several different kinds of stones, okay, that they serve to several different purposes. Okay, so as you saw so far, you have study models, you can do casts, you can do your die casts. So what that changed? The type of work that you are doing. Okay, so those study models obviously for diagnostic reasons, diagnostic purpose. Okay, that means that we don't need the impression material that's so precise, neither a stone cast that's so precise or allows you to have a lot of details, right? Because you're going to change the mouth of the patient a lot. Okay? When you're going to work with your final restorations, you want the most precise materials as possible. Okay? And you're going to see that there are several variations among the different stones. Okay? On the other end here, pretty much the same. Use the stones also to mount an articulator, to make it look nice, and so on. This kind of a die cast before sectioning, you still didn't see that, but that's basically the type of model that your technician is going to have to manufacture like the final restoration. Okay, I have some other pictures that show that in more details. Okay, so what's the stone that we have? So that's derived from gypsite, okay? That probably is going to be somewhere on your boards, okay? So pay attention on that. Probably don't need to know the formula, but at least you need to know that they take the gypsite, that's something that was natural, they triturate that, they calcinate that, or they process that in a different way, and they remove the water, okay? So in the end of the day, it will be a hydrated calcium sulfate or a gypsum, okay? So that's probably one of the most important information that you need to have from this lecture, because I believe that if something is going to be on your boards, it will be something related to that, but usually not the formula, okay? But knowing that's a hemihydrate, you know that if they place the formula there, you need to have like a half molecule of water. Okay? So that's the easy part. So what's the gypsum, okay? So it's the gypsite, okay, without part of the water, okay? Nobody's going to spend a lot of time trying to purify that powder. Okay? So all the times you're going to have some impurities. You're going to have what we call anhydrite, that's the dried gypsum. It's basically the same idea that you're going to mix with water and it would result on your final cast. And you have some salts that you can apply to control the expansion and the setting time. Okay? What will vary from stone to stone? Basically, the way that they process that gypsum. Everything else will be always pretty much the same. Okay? So the amount of impurities. So that's one of my favorite casts. It's super hard to do, but it's a die cast. What's the advantage? It works like a typodont. So you have your preparations in here, and you can remove each tooth individually and place back in position if you want. Okay? Only a few technicians does it because it takes a lot of time. Okay? Basically, you need to segment each tooth individually, and you need basically to pour that cast twice. You need to pour once for the tooth, and you kind of isolate all those roots, and you pour the rest of the cast to be able to work as a typodont. But it's a really nice one. Okay? There are several different ways to do that. What are the properties that you want on your cast? Just think about when you're working with them. Okay? You want, of course, something that's biocompatible, although it's outside of the mouth. But if you want like a tip, every time that you have like anything that's related to dentistry, even if it's not getting inside the mouth of the patient, just say that, okay, you want that to be biocompatible. Okay? Because all the time, at some point, we will touch the tissues of a patient or your tissues. So it's a kind of safe bet. From there, what you want? You want something that doesn't break. Okay? How frustrating was when we were trying to remove your impression, and you look at the central incisor and it's broken in half. It's not nice, right? Especially when you say, okay, now you need to redo that. So everybody gets a little bit sad. So you want some, yeah, I know, I have been there too. So you want something that has some mechanical resistance, okay? By the time that you are waxing up, you want something that can, even if you kind of scratch a little bit the surface, you not completely change the surface of your tooth, okay? So we preserve the anatomy as much as possible. At the same time, you want something that's easy to pour, okay? In here for you is really convenient because basically you have something that comes on the right proportion and says to you, okay, that's the amount of water that you need to have. So you don't need to think a lot, okay? But in the past, or if you want to save money, you can buy like a whole package of stone and you can weight that on a precision weight, okay? And you can manipulate by yourself. At the same time, you don't want anything that expands or shrinks too much, right? You want something stable, you want something that's low cost, and these stones are pretty much low cost all the time. And of course, that's compatible with impression materials. Doesn't matter if you have the best stone, if you can't pour on a specific like impression material, because it doesn't make any sense, right? So it's pretty straightforward. There are 5 types of stones. The ones that you use in here range from type 2 to type 4. The type 5, I never saw at case, and the type 1 is not used anywhere. Okay? The type 1 was used as an impression material in the past. Okay? So obviously nobody uses that anymore. Okay? That's part of the history, so I need to place here. Maybe that's something that can be on your board. You're going to be quickly discuss about the difference between them. But as I mentioned, all the time is the same formula. Okay? What changes is the way that the powder is processed. So what's the difference? Basically, when you go for like the regular, the type 2, or even the type 1, is a kind of open oven. So it's basically just kind of triturate and calcinate the entire powder, but you have a lot of oxygen around. So that means that you have a lot of porosities, and that's normal. And in here is not a big deal because you're not looking for a lot of precision here. You're not looking for the best looking stone. Okay? When you go for type 3, what's the type 3? Is really the stone that you have, so it's a lot more resistant. So how they make that? And they're a high pressure oven. Okay? That means that you don't have as many porosities as before. Okay? And you have more regular crystals. And you go to type 4 and type 5. Those are the stones that you want to have your die cast on. So if you want to have a crown, you want to have a crown performed over those casts, okay? Because they expand just a little bit and they are resistant at the same time. They're not super resistant, but they are the most resistance that you have, okay? So and how they do that? They basically boil and they process the powder in the presence of other substances, okay? So it's a very kind of refined powder that gives you a very smooth mixture, okay? So those are the main differences. So in here you can see some of the mechanical properties. But you can see the type 3, 4, and 5 in here. So what's the difference between them? The setting expansion of number 2 and 3 is really low. Where's the 4? Okay, sorry, 3 and 4 is really low. When you go to the number 5, is a stone with a high expansion, okay? And those stones are not used in here because we use PVS. That's an impression material that almost does not shrink, almost does not change the size, okay? But when you go to some other impression materials from the past, they kind of shrinked a lot. So you need a stone cast that could compensate for that. So they generated like a stone cast that could expand a little bit, okay? So that's why we don't use that anymore. And the compressive strength between 3 and 4, they're pretty much the same. And they reproduce almost the same amount of detail. When you go back to the 2, is the 2. So to the 2 is a kind of a lot more porous material and also doesn't reproduce as precisely as you want. Okay? Again, the numbers are not important. You just need to know that the number 3, 4, and 5, the types 2, 3, and 5. Sorry, 3, 4, and 5. They have a higher compressive strength. Okay? They are more resistant, and they can reproduce details a little bit better. Okay? And what you need to know regarding the expansion range is that number 3 and 4 are the most precise ones, and the number 5 expands a lot. So basically here is a quick summary of those properties. I don't need to go through that because you can really read, but you just need to know that the type 1 is not used anymore, okay? Was an impression material in the past. This one is the one that you use to mount, right? Your articulator, just to make it look nice. Because again, it doesn't offer a lot of good mechanical properties anyway, so kind of doesn't matter so much. The 3 is something that you can do your study casts, especially when you don't need as much precision, but at the same time, it's a very well-rounded material. It just doesn't get you like super smooth surface. The type 4 is the same idea, okay, but it's more designed, it's more desirable for like your final products that you want to manufacture, okay? So it's a more refined powder, it's a more refined stone in the end, so it's easier for your technician to work and it's less prone to error. And the type 5, again, is something that will just compensate for the shrinkage of your impression material, okay? But again, we use PVS in here, so we don't need to go through that, okay? But it's the same stone as the type 4. The only thing that changed is that they remove a little bit of the substance that they placed there to control the expansion. So since there is nothing to control the expansion, the material will kind of expand as much as it would normally, okay? So it's the only variation that you have. And you have something that we call synthetic stone. That's basically the same idea. And usually they are coming with some resin in their composition. And they will usually claim that they have like 0 expansion. Okay? Usually it's not 0, but it's close to that, and it's good enough. Okay? The problem with that, usually they are a little bit more expensive. I think I'm about time. Okay, perfect. So, just to finish this part at least, those are the stones that we have in here at the case. Probably you saw all of them, maybe except by the silver rock, right? The only difference is that the snapstone in here sometimes used also to mount, right? Because really fast. But it's also a type 4. So if you, it's a type 4, but the recommendation of the manufacturer for you not to use for the die cast, but technically by definition of the ISO, okay? So.
Is all things that type 4, so like the gypsum?
Not exactly. The color of the stone actually is the manufacturer, like the pigments that they place there. But technically it can be any color. It's like the PVS, like you're going to see PVS that are purple, PVS that are green, PVS that are yellow. So in here it works pretty much the same. And in fact, if you see here, it's kind of gray, the other one over there is yellow. Okay. Any questions so far, guys? No? Okay. So that's my part of the agreement.